There's a moment that comes to some people, not many. But when it arrives, it doesn't feel like the sunrise everyone talks about. It feels like standing in a burning house, watching everything familiar turn to ash and being unable to look away. You thought awakening would be light. Instead, it's weight. You thought it would be peace. Instead, it's chaos. And the strangest part? Something deep inside you knows this destruction is necessary. Carl Jung spent years in what he later called the most important time of my life. But when he was in it, he thought he was losing his mind. Voices flooded him, images he couldn't control. The respected psychiatrist stood at the edge of what looked like madness, and he made a choice that changed psychology forever. He didn't run from it. He walked directly into the darkness. What Jung discovered in that descent wasn't just about him. It was about something hidden in the human experience, something most spiritual teachers won't tell you because it sounds too terrifying. The truth is this: real awakening doesn't feel like becoming more. It feels like becoming nothing. And that nothingness, that complete unraveling, is exactly what must happen before anything genuine can emerge. In 1913, at 38 years old, Jung's entire world collapsed from the inside. After his break with Freud, he entered what he would later describe with a single German word: nigredo, the blackening, the putrefaction, the alchemical stage where everything you thought you were gets dissolved in acid. This wasn't a metaphor for Jung. For 3 years, he lived inside a psychological crisis so intense that he questioned whether he would survive it, with his sanity intact. He documented everything in what became the Red Book, writing down the visions, the voices, the encounters with figures from his own unconscious that spoke to him like separate beings. Jung called this process individuation. But that word is too clean, too academic for what actually happens. Individuation is the soul's demand that you stop performing and start becoming. It's the psyche's refusal to let you hide anymore behind the masks you've worn your whole life. And it begins with suffering, because suffering is the only thing strong enough to break through the armor of the false self. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this moment. They build careers, relationships, identities, all designed to keep them safe from the very thing Jung walked toward. But for those who can't avoid it, for those who get pulled into the darkness whether they're ready or not, the experience isn't optional. It's a dismantling that happens whether you consent or not. Here's what no one prepares you for. Awakening doesn't start with revelation. It starts with erasure. Jung described the first stage of transformation as the shadow work. The shadow is everything you've rejected about yourself, every uncomfortable truth, every impulse you labeled as bad, every part of you that didn't fit the image you wanted to project to the world. For years, decades even, you've been pushing these parts down, locking them away, pretending they don't exist. Then awakening comes, and the locks break. Suddenly, you're face to face with the person you actually are underneath the person you've been pretending to be. And it's brutal. You see your jealousy, your rage, your pettiness, your fear, not as abstract concepts, but as living forces inside you that have been running half your decisions without your conscious awareness. This is the nigredo, the blackening. Jung borrowed this term from medieval alchemy, where the first stage of transforming lead into gold required burning the raw material down to black ash. The alchemists knew something modern spirituality has forgotten. You can't purify what hasn't first been destroyed. In psychological terms, this stage feels like depression, like everything losing meaning, like the motivations that used to drive you forward suddenly becoming hollow. You used to want career success, social approval, romantic validation. Now those things feel like cardboard cutouts. You go through the motions, but there's no juice in it anymore. Jung warned that this phase could last years. 1 year, 3 years, 7 years, sometimes more, because the psyche doesn't work on your timeline. It works on its own schedule, and it will not move forward until the old structures have been completely dissolved. People in the Negredo often think they're going backwards. They think they're failing at awakening. But Jung understood the opposite was true. The darkness isn't a sign you're doing it wrong. The darkness is the work, the confrontation with your shadow, the loss of your old identity, the total collapse of the false self. This isn't the obstacle to transformation. This is transformation. The ego, that small conscious part of yourself that thinks it's running the show, experiences this as death. And in a very real sense, it is death. The death of illusion, the death of the constructed personality, the death of every strategy you've used to avoid feeling the full weight of your own existence. Most people abort the process here. It's too much. The suffering feels pointless. They scramble back to their old life, back to the familiar patterns, even if those patterns were suffocating them. But for those who stay, for those who continue sitting in the fire even when every instinct screams to run, something begins to shift. The alchemists had a phrase for this moment: solvi et coagula, dissolve and coagulate. First, everything must break apart. Only then can it recombine into something new. After the dissolution comes something even stranger: emptiness. You've faced your shadow. You've let the old identity die. You're no longer the person you were before. But you're not yet the person you're becoming. You're in between, suspended. And this in-between space, Jung called it the transcendent function, feels like standing in a void where nothing makes sense anymore. Here's what happens in the void. Your old motivations are gone, but new ones haven't arrived yet. The things that used to give you a sense of purpose, achievement, recognition, security, they don't work anymore. You try to force yourself to care about them, but it's like trying to light a match in the rain. Nothing catches. People around you don't understand. They see you withdrawing. They see you uninterested in the things that used to excite you. They think you're depressed. They offer solutions. Go back to therapy, try this medication. Maybe you just need a vacation. But you know in your bones that this isn't a problem to be solved. It's a stage to be endured. Jung discovered this in his own process. After his break with Freud, he had no professional community. His colleagues thought he'd lost his way. His practice suffered. But what was really happening was a complete reorganization of his psyche at a level deeper than anyone could see from the outside. The void is actually sacred. It's the space between death and rebirth. In alchemical terms, it's the stage between Negredo and Albedo, between the blackening and the whitening. The old has been burned away, but the new hasn't crystallized yet. You're raw material, potential. But potential feels like nothing when you're inside it. Modern spiritual teachers skip this part. They talk about awakening as if it's a light switch. One moment you're asleep, the next you're enlightened and everything is bliss. But Jung knew better. He knew from personal experience that real transformation includes long stretches of apparent nothingness. Long stretches where you feel neither here nor there, where you question whether anything is actually happening, or if you've just broken something inside yourself that can't be fixed. The void tests something crucial. It tests whether you can exist without the constant feedback of external validation, without the dopamine hits of achievement, without the story you've been telling yourself about who you are and where you're going. Most people can't handle this. The uncertainty is too much. The lack of progress is too frustrating. They need to feel like they're moving forward, accomplishing something, becoming someone better. But the void asks you to simply be, not to become, just to exist in the uncertainty without reaching for a solution. Jung wrote that in this phase, the only thing you can do is wait, continue living, and pay attention to your inner world. The dreams that come during this time are often more vivid, more symbolic, more loaded with meaning. The unconscious is speaking louder now because the ego has finally quieted down enough to listen. This is where many people give up. They've made it through the shadow work, through the ego death, but the void feels too much like failure. They expected to feel transformed by now. They expected clarity. Instead, they're sitting in fog so thick They can't see their own hand in front of their face. But if you stay, if you continue holding the tension without collapsing into old patterns or forcing false solutions, something begins to happen. It's subtle at first, a shift in how you relate to the emptiness. Instead of feeling like an enemy, it starts to feel like space. Room to breathe, room for something genuine to emerge. Then comes the albedo, the whitening, the emergence of something new. This doesn't happen all at once. It's not a sudden lightning bolt of enlightenment. It's more like dawn, gradual, almost imperceptible at first. But slowly you realize something has changed inside you. Jung called this stage integration. The shadow you confronted in the Negredo, the parts of yourself you rejected and feared, those parts are no longer your enemy. They're being woven back into the fabric of your being. Not by pretending they're good, not by spiritually bypassing their darkness, but by recognizing them as part of the whole picture of who you are. This is where real power emerges. Not power as control or dominance, power as coherence. When you're no longer fragmented, no longer at war with parts of yourself, energy stops leaking out through the cracks. You become unified. And that unity has a presence that people can feel without you saying a word. Integration means you can hold opposites. You can be both strong and vulnerable, confident and uncertain, loving and boundaried. Most people live in either or. They swing between extremes. But Jung understood that maturity means learning to hold the tension of paradox without needing to resolve it. The shadow doesn't disappear. It becomes transparent. You're aware of it. You can see when it's influencing you, but it no longer controls you unconsciously. The anger is there, but you're not possessed by it. The fear is there, but you're not paralyzed by it. The desire is there, but you're not driven blindly by it. This is what Jung meant by individuation. Becoming undivided, not perfect, not pure but whole, complete with your contradictions, spacious enough to contain your own complexity, without needing to edit yourself into a more palatable version. People who reach this stage carry a different energy. They're not trying to prove anything. They're not performing spirituality. They're not marketing their awakening. They simply are. And that simple being has more weight, more substance than all the spiritual posturing in the world. Here's what's rare about this. Most people want the benefits of awakening without the cost. They want the peace without the war, the light without the darkness, the wisdom without the suffering. But Jung knew it doesn't work that way. The only way to the albedo is through the Negredo. The only way to integration is through disintegration. The people who make it to this stage share certain unmistakable qualities. They're comfortable with silence. They don't need to fill every space with noise or performance. They can sit with another person's pain without trying to fix it or make it about themselves. They've developed what Jung called psychological stability, not because they're unshakable, but because they've been shaken so thoroughly that they've learned how to return to center. There's also a deep humility that emerges, not false modesty, not self-deprecation, but a genuine recognition of your own limitations and humanity. You've seen your shadow. You've been in the void. You know how fragile consciousness is, how easy it is to slip back into unconsciousness. So you stop judging others harshly. You develop the kind of compassion that only comes from having suffered and survived your own inner hell. Jung believed this integration wasn't just personal. It was collective. When you integrate your shadow, you stop projecting it onto others. You stop seeing the enemy out there and recognize the conflict within. And that shift, if enough people made it, could actually change the world. After integration, life doesn't become easy, but it becomes real. Jung called the final stage the self with a capital S. This isn't the ego self, the small personal identity. This is something larger. The self is the organizing principle of the psyche, the center around which everything else revolves. It's both the destination of individuation and the force that guides the entire process. When you live from the self, decision-making changes. You're no longer choosing based on what will make you look good, what will keep you safe, or what will win approval. You're choosing based on what feels aligned with your deepest nature. Jung called this soul motivation. It's a pull from within rather than a push from without. This doesn't mean you become passive. It means you become responsive instead of reactive. You stop living on autopilot, running programs installed by your family, your culture, your trauma. You start living from a place of conscious choice. The people who reach this stage often report a strange phenomenon. They feel more ordinary, not less. The grandiosity of early spiritual awakening, the sense of being special or chosen, that falls away. What remains is a profound ordinariness. You're just a human being moving through life, but you're fully inhabiting your humanity rather than avoiding it. There's also a paradox here that Jung recognized. The more individuated you become, the more you connect with something universal. By going deep into your own unique psyche, you eventually hit the collective unconscious, the shared reservoir of human experience. The symbols, archetypes, and patterns that show up in your dreams are the same ones that appear in myths across cultures and throughout history. This is why Jung's work isn't just psychology. It's also anthropology, mythology, spirituality, and art all woven together. Because the journey into the self is simultaneously a journey into the human condition. Your personal shadow connects to the collective shadow. Your personal transformation contributes to collective transformation. Living from the self means accepting responsibility for your own consciousness. You can't blame your parents anymore. You can't blame society. You can't blame your trauma. Not because those things didn't affect you, they did, but because now you understand that you're the only one who can do the work of integration. No one can do it for you. Jung also recognized that this process never truly ends. Individuation isn't a destination you arrive at and then coast. It's an ongoing spiral. Each time you reach a new level of integration, new shadow material emerges. New opposites need to be held. New aspects of the unconscious become conscious. This might sound exhausting, but for people who've tasted real transformation, it's actually enlivening, because the alternative isn't peace. The alternative is stagnation. The alternative is living on the surface of yourself, never diving deep enough to discover what's actually there. The awakened life isn't about transcending humanity. It's about fully incarnating into it. It's about being more human, not less. More feeling, not less. More present, not less. Jung understood that the goal of individuation wasn't to become godlike. It was to become fully yourself, which is perhaps the most difficult and most sacred work a human being can do. Near the end of his life, Jung made a series of observations about humanity's future that feel eerily relevant today. He believed that the great crisis of modern civilization wasn't political or economic. It was psychological. Humanity had developed incredible external technology, but had completely neglected internal development. We learned how to split the atom before we learned how to integrate the psyche. Jung saw this imbalance as catastrophic. When individuals don't do their shadow work, they project their darkness onto others. Personal shadows become collective shadows. Nations demonize other nations. Religions demonize other religions. And everyone believes the problem is out there rather than in here. He wrote that the only hope for humanity's future was if enough individuals had the courage to undertake the journey of individuation, not as a selfish pursuit, but as a contribution to the collective. Because every person who integrates their shadow is one less person projecting unconscious darkness into the world. This is Jung's prophecy. That awakening isn't just personal. It's political. It's social. It's evolutionary. When you stop avoiding your own darkness and start integrating it, you change the field around you. You become less reactive, less driven by unconscious forces, less likely to participate in collective madness. The suffering that comes with awakening, the nigredo that feels so unbearable, it's not punishment. It's purification. It's the psyche's way of burning away everything false so that something true can emerge. And Jung believed this process, as painful as it is, was the only real hope we have. Not everyone will take this journey. Most people won't. They'll continue living on the surface, running from their shadow, avoiding the uncomfortable questions, and that's their choice. Jung didn't believe in forcing consciousness on anyone, but for those who feel the pull, for those who can't not do this work, Jung's message is clear. Trust the process. The suffering isn't random. The darkness isn't meaningless. The dissolution isn't destruction. It's transformation. You're not breaking. You're breaking open. Carl Jung spent the last decades of his life synthesizing everything he'd learned from his own descent into the unconscious. He wrote extensively about alchemy, about archetypes, about the collective unconscious, but underneath all the concepts and theories was a single insight. Awakening is suffering because awakening is death. The death of the false self, the death of the ego's illusions, the death of the comfortable lies we tell ourselves to avoid feeling the full weight of existence. But this death isn't the end. It's the beginning. On the other side of the nigredo is the albedo. On the other side of disintegration is integration. On the other side of suffering is a kind of peace that doesn't come from avoiding life but from fully inhabiting it. Jung's prophecy for humanity is both warning and invitation. The warning: if we don't do this work individually, we'll continue acting out our unconscious shadows collectively, perpetuating cycles of violence, projection, and fragmentation. The invitation: there is a path through the darkness, and that path leads to wholeness. The people who walk this path don't become perfect. They become real. They don't transcend their humanity. They embody it fully. They don't escape suffering. They transform it into wisdom. And maybe that's what true awakening has always been. Not the absence of darkness, but the courage to walk through it. Not the avoidance of death, but the willingness to die and be reborn. Not the elimination of suffering, but the understanding that suffering, when met with consciousness, becomes the very fire that forges the soul. Jung once wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." This isn't pessimism. It's precision. It's the truth that every genuine seeker eventually discovers. The path to becoming whole runs directly through the places we've been avoiding our entire lives. So if you're in the darkness right now, if you're in the nigredo, if everything feels like it's falling apart, know this: it's supposed to feel this way. The destruction is necessary. The void is sacred. The suffering is the doorway. You're not lost. You're not broken. You're not doing it wrong. You're awakening. And awakening, real awakening, feels exactly like this.